how Virgin Money are going about addressing gender equality, what sort of initiatives, and how is the culture different from the kind of culture that you experienced at RBS?
Ooh.
Dish the dirt.
Well, so as far as we're concerned, I mean, I'm really interested in the mighty work that you're doing on diversity, because I think we could learn a lot from that. We've been less specific, and I mean, when I was asked to undertake this review for the government, it was really to my shame, really, the first time that we'd properly delved into the data to see where we were at. And as we delved into the data, perhaps not so surprisingly, given that there's a woman CEO, gender equality across the whole business is pretty good. We're almost 50-50, taking the business as a whole. But there are two areas which drive a real gender pay gap for us. And the first is that the team that report into the team that report into me, which we call our leadership team, they're 80% men, 20% women, and we definitely need to address that, and we're consciously addressing that.
What do you think the reason for that is?
Much of it, some of it's an accident of history, some of it's an accident of location, some of it is simply not thinking about it enough and planning for it enough. So, all of my team this year have got specific objectives that show them where we expect them to be with their teams next year. Now, it doesn't mean that, fire men and put women in, but it does mean that we can think differently about structure and differently about progress and differently about career support for people that are, absolutely right for more senior jobs in the organisation. But of course, at the other end of the scale, where we have, perhaps 2,000 of our 3,500 people are in our branch network or in call centres, and there we find that 65% of entrants are women. And so we have the opposite issue, if you like, to deal with. And we've wrestled slightly with, should we be trying to make that 50-50 too? And I think the answer is yes, absolutely. This is a through the organisation thing that we should properly focus on analytically and through setting business objectives.
Yeah, I mean, the message that's coming through from all of you can't address diversity in the boardroom without addressing it in the workplace first. But what is the gender balance in the board?
So our board is, we are 8. We're 9 now. We've got a new woman joined, actually, 5 men and 4 women.
Right, so that's...
Which is very good.
That's pretty good.
Which is excellent, yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, down here. If you wait till the microphone gets to you so that everyone can hear you.
Hi there. This is a question for Jane Ann. I'm a big fan of the Women in Finance Charter, and I was wondering if you could speak more about that. A lot of our clients are signing up, so we provide online games around unconscious bias, but I'm curious if you feel more of a pressure to get it right, to make progress, because you are the namesake around the Gaudiya Review and the other 72 or however many it is now who have signed up. Do you feel, like we talk about this glass cliff, do you feel that people are watching what Virgin Money is doing? And if you could talk about that a little bit, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, I mean, very, very much so, and it's very raw at the moment because, of course, we're just about to finalise our annual report and accounts for last year, and I've never been more focused on the colleagues section, and we've put in a specific section about women in finance, which we haven't quite got right yet because, again, it's a sort of role modelling thing, I think. I've said in my report, which has my name to it, every organisation should disclose their strategy, their targets and their progress against it. And so you'd imagine that people will go, well, we better look at the Virgin Money accounts then and see what they think is the right way of doing it. So we're very, very focused on doing that. The issue that I find really interesting, though, in financial services, and I've always found this quite hard to explain, but throughout my career, when I've sat in my office, in my business, trying to design products or literature for customers, I think about it in a particular way. And I go home, and certainly in the olden days, post would arrive, I'd open it at the kitchen table, it might be from a different bank, and I'd think, gosh, I'm receiving that as a customer differently than I thought about it as a financial services expert, if you like. And we always called it the kitchen table test. It might work technically, but does it make a heap of beans difference when you really look at it in real life as a normal person? And the gulf's quite wide, and I can absolutely see that in the Women in Finance Charter too, that unless we, Virgin Money, and I, Jane Ann Gaudiya, can make the thing real, it's not going to make a scrap of difference. And I find that really hard. I mean, Emily sat behind there. Emily will remember, when we pulled together huge amounts of data and we did lots of analysis, you get lots of academic stuff that comes out of it. Now, forgive me, there are a lot of academic reports about gender stuff around the world, probably, not just the country, and it hasn't made that much difference. And we thought, how can we really simplify it? And I don't mean dumb it down, I just mean what are the few really simple things that if the world did would make a bit of a difference? And that's what we've tried to do with it.
Anyone else? Isabel, sorry, I did find one.
Thank you. It's addressed to all three ladies, really. Obviously, diversity is something that involves a change in culture, and I think some of you mentioned that already. Can I ask, what were your greatest challenges with changing culture, and what were your greatest successes?
Good question. Would you like to take that, Isabel?
I think probably the greatest challenge was in the context of a distillery when there was they hadn't had a female manager, and they weren't used to females being in any position of seniority. And I think it comes down to time and delivery, and actually delivering what you're saying, and delivering on your job and delivering on the results. And I think that really ultimately is the only thing that can count. Another cultural aspect of that was it had been a very paternalistic, old-fashioned family company, very typical profile, if you like, of Scottish family companies, and then it changed hands and a multinational bought it. And so they had a very hierarchical structure. My predecessor had been called Mr. X, and so to call me by my first name was odd, and this is only 10 years ago. I know it sounds slightly odd now. So culturally, I think that trying to break down those kind of really entrenched hierarchies and have people participate in a part of the culture of the organisation was hugely challenging, and it worked ultimately. We did get people taking part in things and turning up for things instead of being different. So I definitely think that was the greatest challenge and greatest success. It's a very particular set of circumstances, though, and not necessarily transferable. Rachel?
I think really once we sort of dug deep into actually the diversity element, I think we actually understood there was a lot of great stuff going on, and it was really a case of raising awareness. I think that's more the case. We have our apprenticeships with our engineers, again, encouraging lots of females to come through in terms of it being very technical, and the fact 95% of them are normally male applications. So I think there's some great stuff. We just really wanted to be able to shout about it and just really raise awareness across the group.
And what about at board level? How are you doing at recruiting?
From that perspective, I know with Mighty we don't sign up to any quotas. We just ensure we've got the right people in the right positions to do the job. I know Ruby has recently departed Mighty as well, so that's another thing. But we've had Ruby on the board for 10 years.
The quotas later when the First Minister comes. Yeah. Anyone else want to? Yes, we've got a question down here, a question up there, but we'll come to you next. This is great. We've got more time for questions. I much prefer that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to ask Rachel about the fascinating idea of anonymising CVs and applications, and a couple of things on that. How did it work for the recruiters? How did they feel? Did they feel comfortable doing that? Because I imagine some perhaps wouldn't.
Yeah.
And was it because the women's CVs were that much better? Or were they all the same? I'm just fascinated by how it worked.
Absolutely. So our recruitment partner's Omni. So we looked at one division. Again, I've got all the stats in terms of how many applications that we had come through. But certainly they were wanting to work with us to run this pilot, very supportive. Again, there was an admin task to have to anonymise those CVs that came in within the first 3 months. And obviously that part of the process was actually, it did show that we recruited more females on the anonymised So on the normal CVs. So it was quite interesting, but full support. And I think really to look at a wider data set, it'd be great to follow up the recommendations and do a wider pilot across more divisions within Mighty. I think would be really good. We just did it for a 6-month period, but very successful, and actually just showed that we weren't biased when it came to recruitment.
We'll take you first.
Thank you. Just interested, I have a particular interest in unconscious bias because obviously the impact that has. And I was wondering whether any of the panel had any suggestions or advice on sort of how you've tackled that. Clearly the stereotype posters are a great way, but I was wondering if there are any other suggestions you had.
So we have consciously entered into unconscious bias training with a firm of experts on the subject, which mean that certainly the top nearly 100 people in Virgin Money have been through this unconscious bias training, which is a full analysis of how you think about certain things, which is then played back to you like a mirror. And the vast majority of people are shocked to see what their unconscious biases are, because broadly we all think that we're not biased, I think, and everybody has some biases, of course. I mean, Emily, if you wave your hand about, I mean, if you were interested, we could put you in touch with the people that do it for us.
There was someone else who had their hand up there, yes. Sorry, we've only got one microphone. She's having to walk quite a lot today.
Hi there. I had a question around the perception of this sort of women not having leadership skills, and that's where the kind of gap is in terms of getting them on the board. And I've seen reports from the University of Glasgow presented as well about this kind of really big gulf in this perception. But when you're asked what are the skills that are lacking, there isn't much substance there. And I also have like a kind of deep-seated belief that the leadership qualities that we need now are different than they were, say, 50 years ago. You know, you need digital understanding, you need customer experience understanding, you need different skills. And I guess my question is around how do you think we challenge that perception that women don't have the skills that are needed on boards and leadership positions?
We need a woman First Minister, a woman Prime Minister, a woman Head of State. I'll let you. I feel quite strongly about that, but over to you first.
I touched on it. It was found it was published in the Scottish Government findings last year, and I haven't gone into it in great detail, but clearly it was found to be an issue. How do you deal with that perception? I think and then this is total instinctive response on my part, some of the people making these assessments may not be exposed to that many people, that many women, for example. So they may not understand, if there's different ways of interacting, if there are different ways of interacting. So I think the reality is I don't know the answer to that one. I'm not sure, and I'd welcome other thoughts.
Do you think part of that perception comes from women themselves sometimes for whatever reason?
I mean, I think we need to think about what leadership is, because with respect, I think the things that you described are more management issues than leadership issues. I don't think you have to know what you're talking about to be a leader. Oops, don't tell that.
You're not been found out
as some
yet.
of our leaders demonstrate, really. But I heard a brilliant description of leadership years ago, which is leadership is the art of persuading other people to do the things that you think should be done. Now, for me, that is quite a feminine thing, because if you think about the maternal cultures in Africa and other places, actually women are absolutely the leaders because they're the leaders of the family, etc. And I don't think we should think of leadership as a hard skill. I think we should think of it as the ability to inspire and empower others to realise the best of their potential. And I think why women should be at least as good at that as men. I think it's about who you are and how you put yourself into. I think how you bravely put yourself forward that's really important, and we should use the role models like the First Minister and others to learn from, I think, and be brave and do it. Stand up and do it.
Do you think women sometimes do underestimate the skills they have? I'm talking from sort of personal experience of friends saying, "Oh, I couldn't put myself forward for a board. I don't have the skills." And actually, when you sit down and say, "Well, you've done this, you've done that," they go, "Oh, right enough." Are we our own worst enemies to some extent?
I think certainly from looking into it from a Mighty perspective, I think a lot of the time we don't put ourselves forward. So there is research out there that you know, men will actually go forward for job roles that maybe they're not fully qualified for or tick all the boxes with, where, you know, certainly, again, from personal experience, I'd look at and say, oh, I'm not sure about that, I don't think I've done that, and really not put myself forward. So again,
We look at the things that we don't
yeah,
have. rather than
imposter
things we do
syndrome,
have.
it's absolutely one of the reasons why we're going to be reviewing that as well, doing some workshops.
Interesting.
But don't forget, let's not fall into the trap of being female instead of male. Men feel the same too. It's just a different balance, I think. I mean, it's not as if, I don't know how you all feel, men feel in this room. It's not as if everybody goes, do you know what, I'm a really brilliant leader. I don't see that often either, you know. So I think we should realise that, for me, definitely, diversity is about success for men and women, and just making sure that we get that balance right where it clearly hasn't been.
How many women... Oh, sorry.
I just want to go back to the question as well, because there is no check at the moment to say if to a private board recruiting to challenge them and saying, are you clear about what you're looking for? And are you, you know, and it goes back to the unconscious bias things, but also more directly and more overtly, are they absolutely clear about what they're looking for? And if they're not, are they actually just seeking to recruit in their own image and not all the rest of it?
If we are recruiting for roles, I mean, I think it still does happen that you're looking for specific skills that you can tick off a box. How do you measure leadership qualities as you described it? It's probably much more intangible that you're not going to get from a CV, for example. You know, you might get 30 years banking experience and this kind of thing, but it is that more intangible qualities that are maybe harder to measure and promote in that cases. But also from my own perspective, I think that role modelling thing is really important. My last role before I started my own business was in wealth management, and the entire, everyone up from the senior management above was a man, except for one woman. And they stood up and they said, you tell us why we don't have more diversity. And you're looking at this very homogenous group of men that weren't only all men of a certain age, they were men of a certain educational background, a certain wealth background. It was a completely homogenous thing. And their perception of me was always that I was too kind of passionate and therefore couldn't operate in their sort of way. And my response to that was to go and start my own business. But for me, there was literally no role model within that place. There was no place for me to go and actually show that I could be a leader.
It's what you said, Jean Anna, but you've got to change the culture.
Definitely. And I mean, I had a similar experience when I worked for Norwich Union, funny enough, where my boss there told me that it was a particular job that I wanted, and he said, I didn't get it for 3 reasons. One, you're too emotional. I'm like, all right. And the other two, it was a sales job, and he said, you lack 2 of the skills you need to be a leader in a sales force. And I said, what's that? And he said, a thick skin and bullshit. So then you know that the culture's wrong.